Hi, Ramneet. Thank you so much for joining us today. I love the fact that you're visiting from Toronto and you're getting a break from the cold. Is it still cold there?
Yeah, it's really cold.
It's really cold, yeah. We've been having sunny, warm days, but, Vancouver, whenever someone's visiting, it decides like, no, I'm going to show you the worst. And then this way, the next time you come, I'll show you my best and you'll love me.
I think I have a different story actually of Vancouver. The first time I was in Vancouver, it was like summer of 21. And then I was here for a week and I had like a week of sun. And it was the first time ever in Vancouver and it's, hot and crisp. And that was the first time I actually met Pat, like my co-founder. And I was like, this is the best. Like, Vancouver's so amazing. And she's like, don't just judge it on this. Like, it's the best that we've seen. But it was just one of the best memories. So every time I've been back, it's always been rainy. But I still have that memory. And I was like, I love Vancouver for that.
I'm glad. It's always the first impression.
Yep, always.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. And welcome to Thrive's podcast. We are partners and we've also developed a friendship. So I'm very happy to have you here. And I want everyone to know how awesome you are. So I'm going to ask you to first tell us about yourself. Tell us about Ramneet before Canada and after Canada. And we'll just, have a nice conversation and showcase our friendship.
Amazing. That's such a deep question, actually. like Ramneet before and after Canada. I feel like there's almost two different people, but there's still a glimpse of the same Ramneet, I think, throughout of it. In short, I think I've always been a dreamer and an overachiever. That's how I define myself, even though it's not always been great overachieving, but I've always been like that as a kid. I've always wanted to just go for the next thing and always want to keep achieving whatever I can within my space. And I think my parents never had to supervise me as a kid because they're like, you're good. Like, you're just doing things yourself. Like, we don't even ask you to. So I had a very great start of my life. I think in my childhood, I was always in the same high school. So that's why it was always great because it was all familiar people around me. And then from that to Canada, I think kind of lost myself a bit in there because of the transition and the new culture. I just didn't know who I was here to ultimately being able to get into KPMG as a tax consultant and then co-found Wayble, which is now, my passion and my full-time career. So never thought I would be an entrepreneur, but I guess Ramneet now is an entrepreneur and a co-founder of an edtech startup. Before that, I was a tax consultant. So I come from a finance and tax background. I have studied that in George Brown College. Did tax consulting for rich people in Canada for about 5 years. So kind of got to see a bit of how people make money, how people tax their money. So that was very interesting for sure. And I think outside of that, I'm just what we call a liver. Like, I just really like to experience life and everything that comes with it, the good and the bad. I just have a very big passion of living a big life. And I want to continue to, shatter any ceiling that was ever there. Mm-hmm. So that's in short is Ramneet before and after coming to Canada.
Oh my God, there's so much there that I want to know more about. Let's start by why did you pick Canada and Toronto?
I don't think I picked Toronto. My sister did pick Toronto. She picked because we had some cousins here and she always wanted to leave India and study abroad. I was always keen on being home. I wanted to study within India. I already had like my university set of like what I want to do. But once my sister came here, she's about 2.5 years elder to me. So she actually experienced the Canadian life and she told me there's a bigger opportunity for you here and you would be able to make something much bigger of yourself. And also just to get some independence, from my family, being able to be on your own and actually earn for yourself. And she's like, there's a big growth, so you should consider. And then by the time I was getting to my grade 12, my mom also kind of got on board with her saying, okay, she's right. Like, maybe we should consider. And then towards the end, I had an option. My parents were like, you can either stay in the same city, or you can move to Canada. And like the college I really wanted to go to was in another city. So I was like, oh, between these two, Canada sounds better. So I ended up coming to Canada and Toronto because my sister was here. So I picked Toronto. So it was more of a family choice than my own choice. But I was just, I'm grateful I made that choice because Toronto has been home for the past 8 years now, and wouldn't want to do anything differently.
Oh, 8 years. So you came here around
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
I think that's almost 9 years.
Yeah, it's getting to, this is the 9th year. So like, yeah, I know. Can't believe it's been so long. I still feel so new, but I, in a way, also feel like I've been here forever because in a way I grew up into an adult here. So Toronto feels a lot home now.
Oh, that's the thing, feeling like home. In different conversations that I've had with newcomers or international students is when they mention home, you don't realize how much Canada, whatever you are in Canada, has become home until you go back to your country and you go like, okay, this is a little strange. Like I feel that I don't fully belong here anymore. And we tend to freeze our lives there. So when we come back, we get surprised by how things have moved along without us.
Yeah.
So yeah, a home is something that people feel it in Canada. Some people don't. I've had an advice from someone that told me usually after 10 years is when you feel like it's home. So 10 years is a long time to know if something is home or not.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you found your home here.
I tend to find that, like, I think a home is more of a personal space than it being a geographical area. Whenever I go back home as well, I feel like I never left. I feel like I become a different, kind of like a similar pre-Canada Ramneet, and things have changed quite a bit. But every time I'm going to India, I always say, and I always have this feeling of like, I'm going home. And then when I'm there, I'm coming back to Canada, I feel the same of like, I'm coming home. So I feel like it is, and this was like one of the Instagram like reels it kept coming from different people. It's the same thing, like people who've moved, like, you know, left one country to go to another. Like home is then never a place, you know, home is with you. And you kind of take with you because you will fully never be at one place. Because when you're here, a little piece of your heart is in your home country. That still is home. And then when you come to your new country, then, you know, that is home too. Which is very right. Like you are never at home, but in the zone, we are always at home because you learn to build that home wherever you go. And I think that's a very beautiful thing that comes out of, you know, being an international student or a newcomer or just leaving your own country. You just become more flexible and more adaptable, and that's why you're easy. It's over time it's easier to build that, but I think when you're coming as a student, there's also that age where you are transitioning into becoming a full adult. So it takes, I think, a long time for any adult to feel like home. And hopefully I think the experiences kind of add to that. That's what I feel like.
That's a very good perspective looking into this. I guess for me, I see it from my lens as someone that left home when I was 16 and just lived in different countries. And I guess just don't feel settled because when I came to Canada initially, it was to do my master's and leave. I wasn't meant to stay. And then plans changed and I stayed, but I always feel like this is just a place that I'm supposed to be in temporarily and then move. So that mentally I'm not forming my roots as I should. So it's tricky because speaking with you, speaking with other people, everyone is giving me different perspectives. And that shows that coming to Canada is an individual journey that you take, and no journey is the same as the others. And that's why we started this to share these stories and to showcase how it's not the same. The Canadian experience is not a cookie cutter, that you're gonna exactly experience this from A to Z, and it's actually more unique to your story.
That's true.
And your own challenges as well. So I want to ask if you had any challenges coming to Canada. You did mention earlier in the beginning of this conversation that you had some challenges when you first came to Canada. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Challenges is I love sharing that part of it, because I think it gives a very true image, as you said, to everyone of what it would look like. For me, I think the bigger challenge was just finding out who I was. To kind of go backtrack it a little bit, as I mentioned, like I was always in the same high school. We stayed in the same locality. There was only once I changed home, but we literally just moved a lane. So I've always been in the same sector within my city, same high school from kindergarten to grade 12. Have had the same set of friends because everybody there was pretty much a local. It was, locality school, so most of them used to live close by too. So I had friendships there that were like 10 years old, and I've had them since they were together in kindergarten or grade 1. So I always knew who I was there because everything was so structured. I could see what the years come is to have, because I had my sister and she was in the same high school. So I could see in her grade what, which teachers come, what happens. So I already had a bit of a forecasted future of what that would look like. But when I came here, I think it was just a complete cultural shock to begin with, but also I was just in a very unfamiliar space. And that was the first time in my life. Like before that, I had never traveled alone. I never even worked before that. So that was the first time I ever took a flight, and that was straight to Canada. So at that point, I think I was just trying to figure out who I was. And that was the biggest challenge, because I think I went completely silent. And I was never that person. I think for someone who has always been so engaged in the community, I was always engaged in my school. I was a part of the student union. So, I had people who I could just go for any advice. But here it was just completely different. The only familiar part was I had my sister, but she also moved 2 years ago. So she was a completely different person now, and a complete adult, which I was kind of getting used to. So I had a little bit of that familiarity at home, but every time I would step out, that plus the cultural and, ethnicity diversity that we have here. I was in George Brown, where there's literally people from every part of the world. There's a little different than some of the colleges here where you have a lot of international students just from one region. But George Brown was very, very diverse. So I was getting to know about ethnicities I didn't even know existed. And there are all these people, I didn't know what to talk to them about. They didn't know our life. It was just a completely different set. So I think it took me completely the first semester to just build some foundation there. And it slowly, as I started having one conversation after the other, I think I started coming out of my shell. And then ultimately when I met my best friend, her name is Christina, she was PR already in Canada, but she was studying. So she was the one who then became that mentor for me, who guided me through this Canadian life. And with her and with other friends, as I started to get out, I think I started to understand who I was. But I didn't have a lot of time before I had to start looking for a job. And that was a whole different ballgame, because right when I landed, within a week, I started working at Popeyes because my sister was working there. So she got me a job as a cashier because I had to pay my rent. So that was just going fine. So my first job was never the problem. But for me, it's I didn't come here to do this. For someone who's never even picked up a broom in her life, I'm brooming the floor. And I was what am I doing here? And then I would come to downtown Toronto to study, and that was a completely different life. And then everybody around me was doing internships and working in an office. And I was how can I do that? Mm-hmm. And it took me so long to figure all of that out that by the time I actually figured that out and landed the job, I was around 20 at that time, and I started working for KPMG. So after that, because I never wanted to stop, I was how can I get a full-time job and keep moving? So I think I just never stopped to understand what's happening, and I just kept going. So I felt very out of place for the longest time. And I think the second biggest is just being able to find a job. Once you find that, what do you do in it? And how do you take that a step further and grow within it? So figuring all of that out while I was doing just life of earning, being able to afford, managing money, again, something that I've never done in my life, cooking for myself. I think all of that added a lot. And I think it took me about 5 years until I felt like I belong, and I felt like I was something here. And until then, it just felt like, what am I doing? But I just kept doing what I thought was right. But I'd never think I was the Ramneet I was in India, because that one was very confident, and I kind of lost all of that when I came here. And bits and pieces, it started coming back, and it was for the better, because I understood who I was as an adult without my parents, without my culture, without, my community. And it truly was who I wanted to be. And I came to that. So I think that was the best thing that came out of all of that. But it took a very long time to kind of grasp what was happening. I think that's the biggest struggle I find everyone faces, of that home, like we were talking about, like feeling homesick, because it not really is a physical place or the food or the culture. It's just not feeling like you belong somewhere. So I was like, I had my whole share of like mental health issues, which I was going through. It's like crying myself to sleep, and I just didn't know why, because job was going fine. I ended up getting into the industry that I was studying in. So I was like, I should be grateful. There's nothing to be sad about. But I still was homesick for such a long time, until my mom came to Canada to visit us in 2018. And that's when I felt a bit okay after meeting her. And I think from there, I started getting better, and it became better. But that period was something which was thrilling in its own way when I think about it. But it was just a very time filled with a lot of confusion and just sadness overall.
It's that independence, but I think the association when your mom visited, having her in this new environment, new space, there's that link that happened. And the fact that you would feel like you don't belong, but yet it's a very diverse place, it kind of seems like it doesn't make sense, because you're not sticking out, but you still feel like you don't belong. Why do you think that happens to international students?
I think one of the biggest reason it happens is because you don't know if people relate to your story, because your story is going to be so different than them, especially if you are talking to someone who hasn't even lived in the same state or province as yours. Like, even if they're coming from India, they would have had such a different life than you. But when you are home, kind of like people around you have a very similar life. Like, it's not identical, but it's not vastly different. So you find that middle ground to relate on. And we have so much time while we're studying to kind of build on those friendships and that community. But here, it's like you're thrown in a zoo, and you have to figure out which cage to go to. Like, it really is sad, even though it's within the same boundary, but finding that piece where you can relate, I think it's very hard. And I find that a lot of students, including myself, like the first reaction to that is more getting closed off. But we don't know that if you'll talk more, then you'll hear more stories and you'll find something to relate to. But to be able to get to that place to share and build friendships as an adult in a new country with a new language, a new culture, I think all of that takes some time, because we don't have to second guess that when you were in your home. But here you have to all of a sudden be like, is this appropriate? Is this how people talk? Everything from the movies we watch to the sitcoms we watch to the cartoons that were our favorite as a kid to the tech we used, it's just so different. So I just felt like even though I can open my mouth, it's just they wouldn't find anything they could relate to, hence they don't want to listen to me. And I think that's really is where you don't feel like you belong, because that similarity in your environment kind of is taken away in a snap of a second. Within that flight, like that 16 hours, 18 hours, wherever you're coming from, it's just like your whole world changes. And nobody's giving you a prep guide of like, hey, this is what to expect, and this is how to start, and this is what you can do, and this is how you can become better. Most of the students are just doing it by trial and error.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we're trying to hopefully change. And with like more and more organizations like yours coming out, all these stories are like so important to share, because I think people can find some pieces they'll relate to, and hopefully it will help them feel a little at home here. And I think that is truly the very beautiful part of all of that.
Yeah, that you would feel alone in your struggles. And then you also feel like I can't complain because everyone is doing the same thing. People underestimate the fact that you go from being in a safe space where things are taken care of for you, whether by your parents or by your friends, and then suddenly you're in a new environment where you're expected to cook for yourself, decide what you're going to cook for yourself, do your own laundry, clean, pay your bills, get yourself to school. All that is difficult to navigate, and finding that balance, because you can lose yourself in all this and you forget to look back or to stop, reflect, and check in with yourself and your mental health. Mental health is always talked about in Vancouver, and I'm assuming in Toronto, by schools, because students don't really know what they're feeling, because these are conversations that we don't necessarily have back home.
That's true.
We're young, people think we should be happy, so they don't really talk about this with us. But then you come here and you go like, why do I feel this way? Why does it feel very difficult for me to get on the bus, go to school? Why am I leaving class to go cry in the washroom and then come back? It is very difficult, and you're already feeling very lost, so you don't know what you're feeling and how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And people like us, like you, like many other organizations within the ecosystem are pushing to support students and empower them in a way where they feel, okay, these are the tools that are available to us. And those tools are important, and you should know, right? So that would be a weird segue. But I would like to know now about, how did you get to entrepreneurship? You said that you never thought of yourself as an entrepreneur. How did it happen?
It all happened very organically, and I think I'm a big believer in destiny, and kismat is what we call it, right? And I feel like some things are just destined for you, but you can't really go out planning everything and think it's going to happen accordingly. Like, you can only manage the next step, and everything else kind of falls into place. And I think that has happened with me throughout like my time here in Canada, or even before that in my life. Like, I never had a very like growing up of like, this is what I want to become, right? Like a profession, a goal. It was always about being good at something, and what that something is, I think, kept changing year over year. But all of that really had a lot of similar core values of being more outspoken, kind of doing something unconventional, and trying to create an impact with your work. So even before I got into KPMG, I never thought of tax as a career. I didn't even know I was going in tax. When I got the co-op, I was like, it's KPMG, like, I'm sold. I didn't want to ask, like, what would I be doing in day-to-day? And I never even looked at my own tax return before I started working in it. So the first tax return I ever saw was someone else's than my own, which is a very interesting story. So, but as I started doing that, I found so much joy in it that I continue to do it. And to think that I built a career in it for 6 years when I never intended to do any of that, I feel like, yeah, things just happen to you. So while I was working at KPMG, and this was around year 3, year 4, right before the pandemic started, what I found was that was a time when LinkedIn was just beginning, like it was becoming popular. And I would have all these students who would reach out to me on LinkedIn asking for coffee chats. And I would always go on those because I love just sharing my experience, because I learned so much from just the people around. Like my professors, my friends, my sister had such a big role in my career. So I understood that mentorship means a lot to you here. So whenever students would reach out, I would always connect with them for a coffee. And most of the students asked me the same questions. Like I could just see a pattern in these questions, and it would take me back to the fact that I had the same questions. It's always about, how did you get into the company? We think like international students can't land co-ops in bigger companies. So, and especially like if you're from a university versus college, because back then Big Four solely hired from university. Like college was not even an option in the application, you know. So they always have all of that question. And then how can they do it? Can I look at their resume? So I realized, okay, everyone's having the same questions. And every time I share my journey, it just helps someone, because they kind of figure out, okay, this might have worked for you. But more so, it just gives them a hope that it can work, because it tells them of like, it's not easy. I have done this job search for like more than a year. It took me about 2 years to kind of ultimately get to KPMG, but it started from Popeye. So there's a lot of steps in between that took me there. And I think when you share that, people feel a little easier, because they're like, okay, it's not easy, but there is a way. So I found that pattern, and I was like, okay, maybe I should share my story so that it helps someone else learn from it. So I picked LinkedIn to do that, because YouTube and Instagram, at that point, even though it was big and creators economy was just starting, I just didn't think I had enough time to commit to doing something like that. And also people are on Instagram and YouTube for entertainment at that point, right? Like it's not really educational, versus LinkedIn was very career driven and education. So I picked LinkedIn, just started creating content, entirely just started as me sharing my story. And randomly one day I was listening to a podcast, and that it was by, I think, Rachel Wong, and she built like a consulting business, helping people build personal brands. And she talked about how she just started one day and she didn't want to plan a lot, and she just made a video and she went one thing after the other. And that gave me a bit of confidence of like, why am I overthinking this? Like, let's just make a video and we'll see what happens. So I just popped up my phone, made a video saying, hey, this is my story. I just want to share. I want to help other international students. So this is what I'm going to do. And that video got so many likes. At that point, I only had like 100 connections. So I remember I had around like 10,000 interactions on that video. So that gave me a push of like, okay, this actually is needed. I'm very honest every time I talk about this, like maybe if that video didn't do good, I wouldn't have been as inspired, but that really put like the fire in the passion I had of like, okay, students do need this. So after that, I just created content for a little less than a year. And I would make videos, write posts. It was all centered towards job search. Everything just teaching from my own experience of like, this is how I did it, resume, figuring out how to position your experience, transferable skills, everything that I thought students should learn. And that's how I met Pat. So Pat was running Empower at that time as a non-for-profit. She reached out to me on LinkedIn, just wanting to do a workshop together. And this was pandemic time. Like I was hosting a bunch of online workshops to help students. So she's like, let's do a workshop together. And then I jumped on a call with her. I really found her with the same passion as I had of like, I struggled to find a job, so I want to help other international students. And at that point, Empower was like a team of 10. It was a non-for-profit. They were doing mentorship. And I was like, this is amazing what you're building here. So I was like, can I align with your vision and let's do this together? Like, why are we only collaborating for a resume? I think we should do something bigger. And she was always like, yes, please come and become a part of this and we can do this together. So I think we both had that. One had the same passion and also had the same attitude of being a collaborator than competitors. So I joined Pat for Empower. And then from there, we slowly started figuring out how we want to solve this problem. I think at that point also we didn't know we would turn this into a startup or become entrepreneurs. It was just the passion was helping international students, sharing our stories and other stories to help them get there. And then slowly over the next 2 years, I think we started iterating one solution after the other. We started with job search training because I thought that was the bigger piece that was missing, but soon realized after that one, we can only scale it so much because it's one-on-one, and there's so many students to help. But also a lot of students said the same thing, that they can do all the right things, but the employers are not as ready to hire them either. So we went as, okay, yeah, there is the employer side of things where they're not as ready to like work with international students because maybe they don't understand the cultural, the language barriers, but also the work authorizations. So we were like, why don't we bring employers into this equation? And that's where the kind of the idea of building a scalable solution with tech came into play, because both me and Pat don't come from a tech background. She was a product manager, but we've never ourselves built tech. So it was just, yeah, I think along the ride, we became entrepreneurs, but that was never the end goal. And it only was when we moved from idea to an MVP to actually started having employers who were okay to pay for it. And we were like, okay, maybe there is something to this. And this was August 2021. So it took us more than a year and a half to kind of get there. And since then, August 2021 is when we incorporated it to a for-profit. Had to say goodbye to all our volunteers because, we were now a for-profit. Started to build it on the side. Pat came full-time in 2022, and then at the end of 2022 I left my job as well, and then we started building this full time, and slowly started building the tech, started looking at it as a bigger ecosystem solution, and now we've been able to like raise capital and kind of do it at a much bigger scale. So I think for us, the entrepreneurship happened because we were just passionate about solving a problem. We saw a gap in the market, but also students were just so receptive of it that it validated our idea that this is needed. Like, we never till date have spent any money on marketing. Like, we have our social medias, we have everything else, but we've never done a paid ad. We have never spent anything to purposely get students. They just come and they've just been connecting, and that just shows you how much this is required. So I still don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I feel like I'm just building a mission of solving a problem. And I guess when you go out and you have to define yourself, and you call yourself a tech co-founder or an ed tech co-founder. But I also didn't know anything about the startup environment until I started building one. And I think I still continue to learn every day, and we have no idea of how we're going to take it further, but we just, you keep doing and you keep solving the problem. So that's how entrepreneurship happened to me. I don't think I chose it, but it happened to me, and I could not be more grateful because it entirely changed my life and how I view work and how much fulfillment I get out of my work. Even though I enjoy thoroughly being a tax consultant, this is nothing like it. So there are good days and bad days, but most of them are good days. So it's been one amazing journey to become an entrepreneur.
Passion is very important. Yeah. That was the story. Me and Javier, that's how we started. What we did is we identified the gap. It started as frustration because we would hear about bad actors or bad players that are taking advantage of students. Our friends would get scammed, struggles that we've been through. And we were like, okay, we need a source of information, right? Where people could go to, they can trust. And I was like, okay, Javier already had the idea of the magazine. I loved it. And I was like, let's do it. And it was driven by passion. We never intended for it to become a business. We never intended for it to become a source of income. It was mostly us wanting to get information out there and to bridge that gap. Since then, we got to meet many other advocates, entrepreneurs who are also in the space, who are also want to advocate and want to empower students. We got to meet each other as well. And we collaborate. We don't compete. We collaborate. We come together in order for us to have a bigger force, a bigger support group. And I think that is the beauty of our industry, that we're all driven by passion, and the passion is international students.
Yeah.
And we always keep them, and we amplify their voices. So I really admire what you guys are doing, and I'm seeing the progress and I'm seeing the growth. You guys have been doing so much lately. You just rebranded, right? What was what drove you to take that step?
The rebranding, I think, when we began as a non-profit, we were called Empower International Students. Love the name. I think it was just like, whatever your mission is, that was our name. But when we turned it into a for-profit, we were like, it's too long, right? You're going to have to short name that someone can pronounce every time. You're like, where do you work? It can't be Empower International Students. It has to be one word. So we did a bit of a word play, and we put like IS for international student and then empower. So we became Empower. But what I think drove for us the frustration was, one, nobody got the name right. Like everybody would either call us ISEM Power, or like people would like make ISEM separate and Power separate. I think it's something to do with too many syllables altogether. But also in a way it wasn't relatable. I think when we think about it as a brand, it has to be something that is relatable and people feel like they're part of a community. And to think of it from a bigger lens, when you look at the mega brands out there like Google and Uber, they end up becoming nouns and verbs at the same time, right? Like Google is a company, but we also say, let's Google this. Say with Uber, right? Like we've started using the word like, let's just Uber there, rather than saying, let's take a taxi there. So it ends up becoming a verb. And that creates a sense of deeper integration within whichever industry you are operating in. So the idea to rebrand came, one, from the fact that it wasn't very relatable. The name didn't really click a lot with people. Also, for students, especially international students, when English is not your first language, it wasn't a word that fell easily on their ears and they could remember it. So we thought of rebranding for a long time, but then it's always about where you want to put your efforts in, right? In a growing company, there's only so much capacity with everything. And we just thankfully landed an opportunity through one of our accelerators that we are part of, the Accelerator Center. And they have a partnership with Conestoga College where they have like a certain credits that they give us for marketing and branding. So it's literally actually students working on it. It's part of their real programs. They also have a complete separate lab for it. So we were like, okay, why not just start this exercise? And we just started with it just to see what we can get out of it. But then that timed with our higher ed SaaS launch. So like for us, for the last full year, we were very much focused on making it B2C, like working directly with the students, but also working with higher education institutions. But the solution was very much driven directly to the students. But we were developing a product to make it more to be a solution for colleges and universities so that they can build an infrastructure to provide the support for their students, which are coming in big numbers. So we were launching that product as well in January of this year. So we thought, okay, it's like a new direction we're taking in a way that we're still for the students, but kind of going a B2B route of working with universities and colleges to provide that solution. So it was a bit of a pivot from a business point of view too. And we realized like, before you become too big, you want to do it before that. Like if we're like, okay, if we know for a fact we're not happy with the name, we want to change it at some point, why not do this now versus you do it later, you lose a lot of brand value. So it was a bit of a strategic decision business-wise in terms of the timeline. A little bit of it happened because of the opportunity we had. And then Wayble came through the student suggestions. Like we researched with a bunch of names. Like for us, it was, again, it had to mean something. It had to become a verb and a noun. So we ended up getting to Wayble, which is the combination of way and able. So it kind of is a way to be able to do something. And this is what we're trying to build, right? Like we're trying to build a way to be able to do something. We're not trying to tell students what to do because, as you mentioned before, the journeys are so different for everyone. No one person would have the same journey as another, as an international student. So we're not trying to tell them what to do. We're trying to build a way for them to do that. So that's how Wayble came into play, and that it could become a verb as well. And then we could have a community, which we could call Wablers. So yeah, the name suggestion came up. We did a bit of a soft testing, ran it by our partners. I remember I was telling you this at CBI as well. And then we just got a bit of a reaction, and I think it just sat so well. And we're like, okay, like let's just bite the bullet and do it. And then we ended up doing it, and I think it was the best decision because it gave us a more relatable tone. People are resonating a lot with it. It's a name easy to remember, and it also kind of refreshed our momentum a little bit. Like even though we had it, I think it just gave this a bit of a like shake things up for people to like have another reason to like think about like what we've been doing. So yeah, that's how the whole rebranding came into play. It was to become more relatable and become a word that can easily sit with international students.
Wayble, yes, it's a very nice name. It rolls out really nicely. And now that you've been through the journey, from blending to surviving to thriving, do you have advice that you can share with international students that are about to start the journey or are already in the journey?
Advice. So many. So much advice. I think I'll narrow it down to my top 3. So my first, I think the biggest advice for any student, the most important one is that speak up. Like talk, share, I think it's been the theme of this whole conversation. When you share your story, share your struggles, start talking, asking questions, things become easier. It only takes that one conversation for you to start building the confidence to have more. And everything that happens to you ends up becoming a part of what you ask for, and also of what you give, kind of like outwards what you'll get. Like if you be quiet, we say, right, like if you have closed mouth, it's not going to get fed. Like you have to open your mouth. So just talk, share with others. It will help you feel less lonely. It will help you build a community, and it will just help you relate. And I think my second biggest piece of advice would be to be as open and ready to experiment as possible. I think I see a lot of international students, they're very, very much kind of looking for someone to tell them a blueprint of like, do X, Y, Z, and that's how you succeed, and that's how it works. It's not like that. It's never going to be like that, depending on whichever industry you go to, age, it will keep changing. So be more open to experimenting. Realize that there's no one way to do it. It's your way. So do what you want to do. And if you think that's not working, like try. If it doesn't work, experiment, go to something else. A lot of it is trial and error. Nobody knows exactly what they're doing. So all of this is trial and error. So keep trying and keep experimenting. And I think the third piece of advice I would have for students is build a little bit of a home for you, even if it's a temporary home. I always suggest this to the students, like bring something from your room in your own home country that you can put up that will make you feel more familiar. Even your bed sheet, a poster, a side lamp, whatever that is would remind you of home. Bring a little bit of that at wherever you're living, even if it's a temporary room, whatever it is, build a home there. Like put up a nice bed sheet, figure out a few things you like, and just start taking care of that space. Like I've found a lot of international students, like I've visited a lot of houses when I was renting, so I would always have to keep moving. So I would go for all these viewings. Most of that was student housing. And I would look at that house and it was just always a chaos. And I get it, like nobody has time to build a beautiful home, But it's just like, if you put things in order, if there's no chaos at home, it brings peace to you. And if there's chaos at home, you will be chaotic everywhere. So kind of build a little bit of that home for you, even if it's just a bed, a mattress, whatever it is, build that so that you feel peace when you come back and rest in that place. And if that place is not bringing you peace, nothing else, no amount of money you earn would ever fix that. Like, it's always like a saying in my culture, is like, if you don't feel peace at home, you would never feel peace anywhere. So build a little bit of that home here. And that is the home plus the people. And the more open you would be to experimenting and talking to people even outside of your ethnicities, the easier it will get in the larger scale. Because if you're just going to stick within your own community, even though it is very comfortable and very much required to assimilate, you also have to assimilate with the other diverse group, which is Canada. It's a very diverse country. You're going to work with people from every walks of life. So start talking to them also and finding that relatability in every culture, because it will just help you build that long-term success. So I think, yeah, these would be my top 3 pieces of advice for students. Is just build a little bit home, ask for what you want, and then ultimately experiment and keep trying until you find a little bit of an algorithm that works for you.
What great advice. Very practical. I love the one where you bring peace of home into your new environment. That's something very simple but very impactful.
Yeah. I think we don't think about it as much.
No.
And I wish I did a bit of that earlier. And I realized when I talked to a lot of students of why I was able to maybe build on much quicker. And I realized it was because I had a stable and peaceful home to go back to. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't perfect by any means, but I had a bit of, I was living with, within like sister and some girls. We all used to like cook meals together, always sit down to talk. So like we all kind of shared each other's load. And then I like slowly started saving up to, buy a bed sheet and a comforter and, little things. But all of that made such a big difference. Like, it's never the big things. It's always these small, simple things that will show you of like what that feeling is like. And yeah, I'm a big supporter of like, make your home a good place for you to be. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but make it good for you. And you decide what that good is, but just have some sort of, home here.
Very, very well said and very important, for sure. Ramneet, thank you so much. I loved our conversation, and I think this conversation that we've had and this episode is very beneficial to students. And how can our audience reach you?
I think the best way to reach me would be LinkedIn or Instagram. So my full name is Ramneet Brar, Brar. And you can reach me on LinkedIn, or the easiest way would be to just Google Wayble, Wayble, and you would be able to find our website. There's my contact information there. You'll find our LinkedIn. You can reach me there, Instagram, whichever way works for you. So that's the best way to find me. But I also just want to say thank you to you, Rafa. I think it's just been such a pleasure to get to know you. I'm a big fan of people who build things from scratch, and I know how hard it is. So every time I see you doing it, I just have immense respect and so much admiration for everything you do and for just giving me this chance to talk to you. And I'm just, very, very grateful for this partnership and the fact that we got to know each other, and we'll continue to be great friends. And I'm looking forward to seeing you more every time I come back to Vancouver.
Oh my God, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for checking this episode. There are more to come. And also, Ramneet is our student of the month. So go and check out her article and check out Wayble. It is a fantastic tool that will make your life here amazing.
Thank you.